Thank you so much for being here. I'm Emma. I'm the curator here at the San Luis Obispo Museum of Art, and we're so pleased to welcome you to this off-cycle opening of Julie Alpert's show, Strange Magic. You can clap now. We've been so excited about this show, about the joy it brings, about Julie's practice. We've been working on it for a year plus. And Julie's essentially been working full-time on this show all summer. And there's been tons of planning. This kind of installation requires so much labor and care by the artists, by our team, and so we're so happy to have it here. I have to thank our show sponsors, who are Todd and Liz. Are they here? I don't think they're here, but yay for Todd and Liz, and the County of San Luis Obispo. So big thanks to the supporters of the museum and of this show. We wanted to just have a sort of casual conversation about Julie's practice. And so I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about how this show came to be, and then we'll get into some more questions.
Okay. Well, my name is Julie Alpert. I live in Seattle, and I'm primarily, I would say, the most exciting part of my art practice is making these large-scale, site-specific temporary installations. But I also make collages, like the ones that you see on the back wall there. Also large-scale collages, and I have a public art project coming up at SeaTac Airport that's opening sometime at the end of 2025. So yeah, it's been interesting trying to figure out how to retain the looseness and expression and energy and, you know, pizzazz of something like this, where it's all coming from a place of intuition and like stream of consciousness, and for the airport project, using more durable, long-lasting materials that will be up for forever. So, what would you like to?
Yeah, let's start with the collages. So behind you on the wall there are 3 collages that I've been looking at for months as we sort of plan for the exhibition. So maybe talk about how you start a project like this that's so installation heavy when you can't work in the space.
So the first thing I always like to do for a site-specific installation is do a site visit. And so I came here in February for a couple nights and came into the gallery and measured everything. And I'm always sort of looking for an architectural feature that stands out or feels like the most unique feature of the space. And the thing that stood out to me was behind this window-shaped cover with the eye on it is a window that's the same shape. And so I decide on an orientation. So you come into the space and you kind of go, well, where am I going to stage this sort of like set-like piece? And I kind of figured, well, if the window's on that wall, then I can double it, and I like to use a lot of symmetry. So I just started with those 2, the mirrored windows, and everything else just grew out of that. And I do the site visit, take a bunch of photos, do a bunch of measurements, go home, and I make a blueprint drawing, like a line drawing on just an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and then I make a bunch of photocopies of that. And that ends up becoming the background for each of these iterations. And I end up cutting it away and adding on top of it as sort of an additive, reductive process. And I made 4 collages. The first one was garbage. It's no good.
It's not here.
It's not here. Did not go to the framers. But this one on the far left, something just clicked into place with it. And I basically like to front load all the decision making and give myself a lot of choices so that, like I could have just gone with that first collage, but it felt like I had to do at least 2 more that felt really fleshed out in order to feel like confident enough to then select the elements or the components from each of those that get combined Oops, not that switch. Bad light, bad light. To then have like enough to pick and choose from. So I cherry picked, you can see from the 3 collages, you can pull out like there's the drippy rose, there's the nonsensical text that's right above me, there's the 2 folding tables.
Scoot in a little further, folks, if you can.
And then the next step is, once I've selected all the shapes that I want to scale up, this is where my wonderful husband Andy comes in.
Andy in the green shirt.
Andy in the green shirt. He's also a great artist, and he knows a lot of like software, and so he digitized. He redrew all of the shapes that I wanted to scale up, and then we printed out to scale each of those shapes in a paper template form, and then I traced them onto the wood, and then with a jigsaw I cut everything out. And so I started with all the cut shapes, knowing that those would be mostly the suspended elements. Some of them are sitting on the shelf, some of them are freestanding, and then everything else kind of, I knew I didn't want to I want to have a variety of materials and textures. And so it's like, okay, that's enough wood. So now let's work in some like arts and crafts materials, really like readily available, easy to find, easy to connect to, office supply stuff.
Can you talk a little bit, so you start every day in Seattle with a walk, and you say you're sort of inspired by routine and by like the domestic space. Can you talk a little bit about those ideas of home, of routine that's in this work? I mean, I see it, I feel it, but yeah, curious.
Well, so you were asking me about some of these modified found objects that are on the shelf here that have the double cast shadows and stuff. So those are all like cleaning supplies or like hygiene things that I have actually used, and it feels important to me that like these soap bottle pumps are things that I've used, not things that I've like dug out of other people's recycling bins. Not that I don't know why I would do that. You know, and then like paintbrushes in a can to sort of like, I don't know, remind you of this, how this whole thing was made. So those are sort of like signifiers, you know, laundry detergent bottle. There's another one over here. There's a mug that I use every day for coffee. It looks like this, exactly like this, but much smaller.
Normal human size.
And then in Seattle, a lot of us don't have air conditioning. Now things are getting a lot hotter, but summers are mostly for box fans, and so that's why that's in there. And I think that it's both soothing to do these repetitive, like the laundry and the hand washing and the turning on and turning off of the fan and the drinking of the coffee every morning out of the same mug, but then also it can become really redundant and a slog, but then you can, I don't know, you kind of like go in and out of those two feelings. Sometimes it's very soothing, and other times it's like another load of laundry, you know?
Yeah. Can you talk about, you talked a little bit about materials, but can you talk a little bit more about the materials that you used and the sort of, we talked about the tape being different colors, how you kind of like that handmade material quality.
Yeah, I'm trying to strike a really careful balance between things being kind of wild and loose and expressive, and then being like very tightly controlled and intentional. So there is this balance of like these really like graphic, hard-edged cut wood shapes. Even the patterns inside of them are very graphic, but they're all hand painted. So every single aspect, every component in here was hand drawn, hand painted, hand cut, glued. And I want you to be able to, I want to be able to connect to you, even if I don't ever meet you. I want to be able to connect to you through the sort of like the sensory tactile experience or imagining of like, you know, like you want to touch, you can't touch this stuff, but you want to touch this stuff, and you can also relate to how it was probably made. Because these are all things that we did as kids in summer camp or kindergarten. but it does feel, yeah, I think, what did you say the other day? You were like, well,
Said a lot of things.
you said a lot of things, but I was just saying that I'm fine with things being like lumpy and, you know, like the fringe, and there's just certain things that are like really loose, and you see that like handmade mark, and I think that is just more human, and I want it to have that kind of quality.
Yeah. So last question, and then we have a few minutes for y'all to ask some questions. Can you talk about your color decision making?
I don't know. Obviously, I like color. I don't know. I was born in 1980, and so I think there's like things from my grandparents' generation, from 50s, 60s, into my parents in their 20s when they met in the 70s. Just the interior decor, the like avocado green refrigerator, and the like many competing like really hideous patterns. I think that's in it. I think the sort of like, people always mention Lisa Frank, and like I think I missed that boat a little bit, but I think these are colors, these like Technicolor, like fluorescent 80s colors. And I want, they feel good. They feel good to look at, you know, and I want you to feel good looking at them. So, and Andy and I always talk about how we're kind of like a litmus test for, you know, if we're entertained and if we feel good and excited and we're kind of giggling as we're making this stuff, then like hopefully you're going to have that same experience.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we have just a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions for Julie.
Yeah, have you always worked in this kind of sculptural, fully immersive kind of way? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember when I was an undergrad. So I kind of come from like a theater background. When I was in high school, I
You can see it, right?
As a theater kid. But I also always did painting and drawing and sculpture. And then when I was in undergrad, I remember I immediately felt like I want things to be coming like off the wall into the space. So I was experimenting with that there. And then when I got to graduate school, I ended up moving to Seattle to go to UW. And it was a very traditional painting program. So it was like the figure and the landscape, oil painting, and I just remember being like, I just want things to like, you know, be really, really dimensional and break the plane. Like there's something about like a square rectangle that just makes me feel, I don't know, bored. Yeah.
Yes, I see a couple of hands in the hat.
I was looking at your shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, aren't they great? I love their shadows.
Really cool, and some of them have shadows from two different directions.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the inspiration behind that? Some don't.
Well, that was more of an aesthetic choice. Sometimes I think that a cast shadow is more interesting than the object that's casting it, when it flattens it and abstracts it. And also, we had talked about callbacks. There's a lot of like repetition of things, and so when you see something like in different versions, the thing itself, the shadow, it's just, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's there.
Does what you said.
Yeah.
It makes it not boring.
Yeah.
Well, and there's like the laundry detergent. There's the bottle there, like there's all sorts of ways that the same objects are being used in multiple ways.
It also tells you about the wall. It tells you that there's an object, and then there's a light cast, and it tells you about the space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Two light sources
Yeah.
for the doubles.
Yeah.
Experience.
Yeah.
I want to know if you bought your shirt before or after.
I really didn't intend for this to go with that minty wallpaper color, but
It sure does.
I know.
It looks like you made it custom. Yeah, and the red hat.
I'm just curious about the repeating pattern on the walls.
yeah, the drippy eyes.
Yeah. We were talking about
I'm curious too.
Yeah.
So the conclusion that I keep coming to is I started doing that shape in 2020, 2021, when everybody was wearing masks. And so there was something incredibly frustrating about not being able to, I feel like the eyes do communicate a lot, but so much happens, so much expression and communication happens under the eyes. And I think that's why I started adding eyes to everything.
You drew all those.
Yeah, these
Yeah.
are all hand-drawn.
Hand-drawn.
Yeah,
pretty
that took
crazy.
me about a day.
Pretty
How
amazing.
many days were you here? in
I
Scotland?
feel like I live here now. I have been here since a week ago Wednesday.
But I have to say that Julie, I've worked with a lot of artists. Julie was so organized. She had like a production plan for the week. Like Wednesday we're doing this, Tuesday we're doing this, Thursday we're doing, like everything was planned out. It was very, very organized. It was so refreshing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
What does it involve to transport your artwork here and to set it up?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on how it's shipped. And we had an art handler who he has a van. And,
Like a small art handler, small company.
and it was great because then I don't have to overpack. Like I pack everything and I wrap, like all these things get wrapped in plastic and then a layer of foam. Some things are in boxes, like custom boxes that I build. Yeah.
But she really has to know like what's the order of things, what's the way that to pack it that makes sense based on how we're gonna handle install, and what is she gonna do on site. We had a lift in here for the first time, which was very fun. I don't think it's been picked up yet. It's still
I
in
think
the
it's still
parking
sitting
lot.
in the parking lot.
Yeah, anyway. Yes, in the back.
I was wondering, the centerpiece that kind of looks like cursive, but
Yeah.
not really. Is
Yeah.
there anything hidden?
It's nonsensical text, and you can see it's like repeated down there. You said it looked like, and it's
The word-
also repeated on the fan.
Yeah, it looks like the word Lynn to me.
which is actually my middle name. So that was like a subconscious sort of thing that I wrote out in cursive. But when I do that, I'm thinking about when we first learn to write our signature and how we're figuring out how to express our identity or our personality through our signature, which we use over and over and over again throughout the day as we're buying things. Yeah.
Maybe one more.
When you started your creation and you used those papers and you said you made copies of it, and then you bring it here, is there anything you added or took away, or is it exactly?
That's a really good question
that
because so I was just talking to my family last night at dinner about how I've been doing this for about 15, 20 years, and the first couple of installations I only prepared about 50% of the work at home in my studio, and then the rest of the 50% on site, and that was very challenging and ended up like, just creating a lot more stress for me on site and a lot more uncertainty, which just wasn't helpful because I really do want there to be like an improv element to it. So this one I think I finally have the ratio dialed in, and it's about 90% in the studio and 10% on site. So I didn't know the heights, I didn't know the exact locations, like the shelves, I didn't know where those would go. All of these shapes, I intended for them, the suspended ones, I intended for them to all be really just in one depth of field, like not going back in space. And I had a kind of a different arrangement for them. But once I got in here, I just started making decisions that made sense to the work as it was being made.
Okay, last one.
Coming from Seattle, do you think that your love of color has anything to do with coming from
I am actually not from Seattle. I am from Washington, D.C. I grew up in a Maryland suburb of D.C. If that makes any difference. But yeah, Seattle is very
So
gray.
you've always had a love of color then?
Yeah. I mean, I've just always loved clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, awesome. I'm going to let us get out of this room. There's so many of us in here. We'll open the doors, but feel free to come up to me or Julie if you have more questions and hang out. There's wine, there's music, there's other art shows. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.